These four, do you have a favorite Cenobite?
I do not. I hate them all. However, the one that gives me the most just makes my skin crawl.
The most displeasure, which in Cenobite terms means the most pleasure. Hit me with it.
Dragon claw, wing and scale. Come now, let's examine the tale of the greatest beast ever considered. Another episode of Big Flying Lizards.
So, Austin, I have seen very disturbing things in this film. Do you know what the most disturbing thing in the entire film that I saw was?
See, this is funny because I'm dressed like the ghoul and you're doing the voice.
Yes, that's all I got here.
Lovely. No. What's I don't know. The maggots. The part where his entire body gets torn to smithereens.
You know, all of that is pretty disturbing. I wasn't going to do that for too much longer. But the most disgusting, disturbing thing I saw. Who taught all these actors and actresses how to kiss? I don't think I've ever seen such ugly kissers in any movie. Like, I was even looking up like 20 top ugliest kisses. And at least in most of those, you can tell they're trying to be funny about just doing bad kissing. They genuinely were all bad. I don't think there was a single actor or actress that actually like Frank is apparently this fuckboy who doesn't know how to kiss. Like did you notice that?
It's real. That's what's going on here, Bryce. It's real.
I don't know.
This is what good sex and good kissing actually looks like. And maybe you don't like that. Maybe it's not titillating to you, but this is what people who are experiencing the next level of pleasure are actually doing.
I would disagree, but you're welcome to think so.
Regardless, I would like to welcome everyone to Big Flying Lizards, a dragon movie and television podcast. My name is Austin. Across from me is the one, the only Mr. Bryce Wilson. How you doing, Bryce?
Spooky. It is spooky season.
It's our Halloween episode. But I'm stealing your thunder a little bit. What are we doing today? What are we talking about?
We're talking skeleton dragons.
Yes.
Specifically, we are talking Hellraiser.
Yes. Hellraiser, an all-time favorite of mine. And if it's not apparent already for those, I mean, on YouTube, the YouTube people get it. But for the audio listeners, my name is Austin. I'm going to be your pain demon for this evening. I am a huge fan of the Hellraiser franchise. It is easily my favorite horror movie franchise. Like, it's Hellraiser, and then it's like 4 miles before you get to my number 2. So I'm a huge fan. And just to do a little bit of table setting here, Bryce does not like horror movies.
Nope.
So this was a big deal that he agreed to sit down and watch one of my all-time faves, which does contain a dragon.
It does.
However brief said dragon's appearance is in the actual film.
That awkward moment when Smurg has more screen time.
Yeah, I meant to clock it before, but I think the dragon is actually on screen in its dragon form for less than 3 seconds.
Which might affect it in the score at the end.
We'll see. That's coming at the end where we'll have a detailed breakdown. We'll dig into those 3 seconds as much as possible.
Well, I mean, I feel like there's a lot to the actual character. I mean, more than just the 3 seconds.
There's a fair bit to talk about. Like no joke. But again, that's coming up at the end. Just to start things off here, Bryce, what'd you think?
So I will first say I recognize why you enjoy this movie. I do think that as far as horror/gory films, it's a good film. I will probably never watch this film again. And to be honest, like, I know you want to continue showing me these films, and I might watch 1 or 2, but I'm honestly planning on the minute we finish this podcast looking stuff up behind the lore. If I don't get questions answered, by you.
Oh, I got you.
Oh, I know you'll get me on there. It's just there were so many things I'm like, oh, I'm not going to watch any of these other ones, but I have a whole podcast to do. I'm not going to look anything up, but
Now, I will say that if the first one doesn't hook you, there's not a lot of reason to continue.
Okay.
I am not one of these crazy people that tries to say that any of the sequels are better than the original. Like, this is the high watermark in the Hellraiser franchise. Not to act like there are films beyond this one that I legitimately love, but I like that this horror franchise follows like the best format, which tends to be like one great, weird, original film from an auteur to start things off, and then everything down the line is kind of tied back to that to varying degrees. And they take it into like weird directions, but it's all kind of predicated on like, okay, you like seeing these sadomasochistic demons come and tear horny people to smithereens. We got you, buddy.
Well, unless you feel like it's going to have to go into the podcast itself to discuss that, do you just want to give me a couple of, obviously people know you love this film, but do you want to break down what you love about this film so much, or do you think it'd be better to wait till we actually start talking about it?
I can give a bit of an overview if that would be helpful.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I do think this movie, first of all, is a near masterpiece. I think that the craft on display is really, really strong. There are some budget limitations, so I'm leaving a little bit of room there. But I think that the like themes underneath the violence and gore are actually really strong. And Clive Barker is a man with real vision. So I do think that there is a baseline quality to this film that is missing in the vast majority of horror. But beyond that, what makes it a favorite for me, I think, is that it delves into a lot of just my personal favorite pet themes. You have demons and houses, which I just eat that shit up. Anything about summoning demons, especially if it's in like a domestic setting, that gets under my skin better than anything else, really. It also has sex, as does most of the franchise, which is weirdly disappearing from the films of today. And I also, we had that bit up top there, just kind of making fun of it, but this is a franchise and a film that is okay having like ugly sex and like weird sex, which is unavoidably part of the human experience, but is something that most filmmakers and most people seem to be uncomfortable representing in popular art. It also has a few other things. Like I really enjoy seeing one actor play multiple characters in a movie. I also think that there's it's a franchise that, like, for all its extremity, I think it's not afraid to go about it with a bit of a wink. Especially the first 4 films, I would say, have quite a degree of self-awareness. Something that like the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are actually pretty good at this as well. But I think Hellraiser, Pinhead, and a lot of them, they hold their own in that regard. So I'll have a lot more to say as we get into it, but that's outlining like the broad strokes of what just really appeals to me about this movie.
No, for sure.
On top of, it's just so weird and singular. There's really nothing like this.
Well, and I feel like this is actually a common conversation that we've had off screen, as well as conversations that I have with coworkers, that studios are just so concerned about not making a profit from a movie that they're not willing to take risks like they were in the 80s, like they were in the 90s, like they were in the early 2000s. They just want to regurgitate nostalgia because they know nostalgia sells. Well, this, yes, there's how many of them? 14?
There are 10 Hellraiser movies, and then also the 2022 remake. So 11 movies in total, which I'll be happy to break down at some point in this recording.
We will get that full breakdown. But yeah, this this is a completely original idea. Like you said, it's taking something that's almost considered taboo in society.
I think you can drop the almost there.
Most society. It's taboo in society, and it's putting it literally on camera. And
that's exciting.
Yeah, as somebody who can appreciate not going and watching a Disney movie that's been remastered to live action for the 20th time.
Opening up the vault one more time.
Just taking that. Like, I appreciate, and I really do enjoy whenever there's a project that's sort of original idea. Again, I'm not going to watch this movie again, but I can appreciate for what it is and appreciate that it's an original idea.
Yeah, and within that, I say it's so original, more so because I find Clive Barker's sensibilities so unique. And I'm a fan of his other work. He's directed 3 features, one of which I'm actually kind of saving. I still haven't watched Lord of Illusions, but big fan of Nightbreed as well, which I think you would enjoy maybe a bit more than this. It's still like spooky and weird and has a serial killer element, but it's his follow-up to this that he had a much bigger budget for. And it feels like the main thing he's trying to do with that movie is just have as much fun as possible with like the nightmarish creature effects.
Okay.
So it's about this whole world of like demons with superpowers that have been like banished from society, even though you come to find out in the course of the film that maybe they're actually the good ones.
Spoiler alert!
But no dragons in that one, so not a lot of room to discuss it on the podcast. But anyways, like Books of Blood, his written work, I'm also into, and there are a lot of reoccurring themes of like sex and weirdly that word trips me up. Sadomasochism. Did I get it?
I'm sure there's a few people in the comments that will.
Am I revealing what I'm into, or rather not into? Am I tipping my hand too much here?
Go ahead, comment below. Is Austin tipping his hand, and are you willing to tip your hand?
Sadomasochism. I believe is how it's said.
I think so.
But yeah, so I'm a fan. And I'm just getting my bias out of the way here. But I do think that he has quite the vision that has never been realized in a film as well as it is in the first Hellraiser.
Now, I know we got to actually dive into the movie eventually, but I do just want to ask, like, there's some of these directors and writers that are just, like, they are involved with projects that are really weird and odd projects, and they themselves are really weird and odd. Is Clive Barker one of these people, or if you saw him, you're like, oh, that's a normal dude?
He, I think, presents pretty well. Like he's charismatic. Like he can certainly hold his own in an interview.
Okay,
if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's not like he has like crazy face tattoos or anything. So as far as his appearance, I think that he's passing quite well. He could be any one of us. But, you know, it's once you get to know him and kind of get a sense of his art that you're like, oh, you're fucked up.
As you said, just really leaning into that human element.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you want to discuss before you give us the movie breakdown?
No, let me just tell you all what Hellraiser is about, if I may.
Let's hear it.
Hellraiser is a 1987 supernatural horror film written and directed by Clive Barker and based on his novel, The Hellbound Heart. It involves a group of demons called the Cenobites who are summoned by a wicked man named Frank using a mysterious puzzle box. Once Frank is taken by the Cenobites, his brother, Larry, moves into the same home with his wife, Julia, looking at it as a chance to repair their marriage. When Larry cuts his hand moving in, the blood resurrects Frank in a diminished form, and it is revealed that he and Julia had a secret love affair. Julia begins killing men and feeding them to Frank so that he may restore his body. Larry's teenage daughter from a previous marriage, Kirsty, discovers this and accidentally opens the puzzle box. Once visited by the Cenobites, she attempts to bargain with them to take Frank's soul instead of her own. The movie was well received by horror fans, grossing almost $15 million on a $1 million budget and spawning 9 sequels as well as a 2022 remake. And I will have you all know that that is the trickiest synopsis I've had to do to date, because this movie is doing a lot.
It is.
The most, what you might even say.
You're doing a lot over there as well.
I'm trying to match the extra level with my, like SPF 1000 that I'm going on here. Okay, so to break it down a little bit more, what I mean by this movie is biting off a lot. And I just love when like a new director comes out the gate swinging, just wanting to do everything.
Yeah.
This movie is really dealing with 3 totally separate supernatural entities.
Yes.
Because you have the Cenobites, who are summoned by the puzzle box.
Yes.
And their whole thing is that they are like interdimensional seekers of sensation. And it doesn't matter what sensation, just like the degree of it is what they're after. So that to them, like feeling the greatest degree of pain is the same as feeling the greatest levels of ecstasy or what we would call pleasure.
Yes.
And when they get summoned with the puzzle box, they want to share these experiences with those who summon them. Pretty creepy. And in this movie, there are 5 of them, I believe.
I think there's 4.
Okay, I'll run them down. So you have Pinhead,
Yep.
of course, who's the main guy.
Mhm.
And then you have the one who's just female Cenobite, which I feel like she should have got a name, but she doesn't appear in the other movies.
She's got like the whole smoker, like.
yeah, she has the tear in her neck. And I say that, but I think she's in Hellbound. Anyway, she doesn't persist the way that Pinhead does. So you have Pinhead, female Cenobite, you have Chatterer, and then Butterball.
Yes.
So, yes. Okay, so there are only 4 in this one.
But there's that weird, like, gremlin thing.
The penis monster.
Yes. The penis monster.
Now, he has a name. He's called the Engineer in the Hellbound Heart novel. But that also gets tricky because then in Hellraiser 5, it's about a detective that's like trying to track down a serial killer called the Engineer who turns out to be Pinhead. But it's not the Engineer from this first movie. But they don't even call him the Engineer in this movie. I'm already getting lost in the sauce here.
Hey, there's a lot of sauce to get lost in.
But you have the Cenobites.
Yes.
So those 4. And then you have the old man that turns out to be a skeleton dragon who is after the puzzle box throughout and just up to all kinds of shenanigans.
Eating grasshoppers.
Yeah. He's hungry. He's literally skin and bones.
Mm-hmm. He's not even skin.
No. Which I do enjoy this movie's fascination with the idea of skin, and the sequel takes that to disgusting levels where it's like you can regenerate your whole body, but you can never regenerate your skin. You have to get it from somebody else. But then you have those 2, and then you have Frank, which obviously he's intertwined with all of that, but the supernatural phenomenon going on with him, where he's like regrowing his body and like consuming the flesh of others, seems entirely separate from the lore and the magic and the mystery going on with the other 2.
Well, the other 2 don't even seem to like acknowledge that that's going on with Frank. Like the Cenobites were about like,
No one escapes from us.
Yeah, they're whole impossible. No one escapes us. And then their ego is what helps Kirsty end up escaping them, because they're like, no, we must take Frank. The Cenobite reputation must be upheld.
Now I know you asked me this off camera and you wanted, but do we want to go through the podcast before we ask which are our favorite Cenobites?
No, just hit me with it. Of these 4, do you have a favorite Cenobite?
I do not. I hate them all. However, the one that gives me the most just makes my skin crawl.
The most displeasure, which in Cenobite terms means the most pleasure. Hit me with it.
Clacker.
The Chatterer.
The Chatterer.
I know, dude.
He disturbs me on such a level. Like every time I'd much rather look at Pinhead for hours and hours. I could go to sleep with a poster of Pinhead over my bed if I could never see the Chatterer again.
So a couple things on Chatterer. One, I agree with you. And there's a lot in his just like that he is actually chattering. Like that motion and that sound is so unsettling.
Mhm.
I absolutely love it. In the sequel, of course, Chatterer comes back, all of them. But they switch up the design of Chatterer quite a bit because in the filming of this movie, that actor wasn't totally blind. He could not see through the makeup at all, which, you know, could be considered a bit of a hazard.
Yeah.
So they change it up. I don't like it as much in the sequels, but you also get like very briefly a sense of the origin of all of them. And this is pretty disturbing. Do you want to know what Chatterer is?
Hit me with it.
Okay. So spoilers for Hellraiser 2, Hellbound. You find out that all of the Cenobites were once humans, and Chatterer is actually a child, like a male child. And I think the implication there is he had like some kind of like oral fixation, but it's implied that Pinhead has like recruited and like twisted all of them to his demented purposes. It's fucked up, dude.
So was Pinhead the OG then? Like, was he the original one, or
of this group for
Okay.
sure? So they come from the Cenobite world, but it'd be kind of inaccurate to say that. It's like the realm of Leviathan, which is like the evil god of hell. And it in the second one, you see the origin of a new Cenobite in Dr. Chenard, who then he's the doctor, and he has like these like Doc Ock, like evil, like apparatus arms. And so you see him as a human get turned into a Cenobite. And by witnessing that process, you get a sense that there could be other groups of Cenobites, like made by Leviathan and like just out fucking shit up in other parts of the universe, the interdimensional space. Yeah, but in this group, to answer your question, Pinhead is revealed to have been like a World War II like operative. He might have been a medic or something, but he was, you know, it's the classic Hellraiser story where he was like in search of the greatest degree of sensation, and that led him to the box. And you can imagine from there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't think you get answered really my question though.
What about?
Who was your favorite?
Oh, who's my favorite?
Yeah.
Oh, for the entire franchise or this movie?
Both.
It's hard to beat Pinhead. There's a reason he's the main. There's a reason that the franchise centers around him. Which, fun fact, in Clive Barker's vision for the franchise, Julia was actually going to be like the main character.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like and that's why it's funny that like there are the three separate supernatural entities. The Cenobites are just like part of this first movie. He didn't necessarily envision the franchise following them, which I think is to the benefit of this and the sequel.
Yes.
So Pinhead's the easy answer. I am also a big fan of in Hellraiser 4 Bloodline, the Angelique is the demon princess of hell, and she's a really just wicked, like devilish character, and the design of her is absolutely disgusting in a way that I totally love. If I can just describe it for you, I won't make you look at it. I won't make anybody witness this that doesn't want to, but the design for her and her like realized Cenobite form is that her scalp has been peeled open at the middle, and then you have like metal straps attached from that skin to her shoulders. It's super badass. So as far as design, that's probably my favorite Cenobite, but it really is Pinhead.
Okay.
Do you want out yet?
I wanted out a while ago. Well, before we see me vomit on screen here, do we want to start up with chapter 1?
Hit me with it.
All right. Chapter 1 of our 3 chapters part. Frank Cotton purchases a mysterious box in, I didn't know this, but they were in Morocco, apparently. Frank sets up his little voodoo satanic ritual and solves the box. The Cenobites appear and they start torturing and tearing Frank apart. And Pinhead comes and closes the box and poof, everything in the room disappears. Cut to Larry and Julia coming to the house.
Which just makes me think of the greatest moment in Impractical Joker's history.
Larry!
I was calling you, Larry.
I remember when we watched that, we were dying.
There's also just like Larry is, and you know, I'm not trying to disrespect any of our listeners with the name Larry. It's to me, it's just not a very sexy name. And it's setting up this like beautiful dynamic where like Frank is this like total hottie, and then his brother over here is in this like failing loveless marriage. He's kind of a dope.
Yeah, it's fitting.
Larry.
But they're exploring the house, and it turns out this is the house they grew up in. And there's a lot of satanic stuff all throughout the house. Julia finds some porno pics of Frank.
Nice.
And she rips one of them to take the shirtless picture of Frank away. During this time, you find out that Larry has a daughter, Kirsty. And
From a previous marriage.
Marriage.
Is that would mean that Julia is her stepmother.
And they do not get along, Julia and Kirsty.
Because Julia sucks.
I have thoughts on that later. I have a whole thing. But you do see throughout this that Julia and Larry's marriage is very strained. And Julia is like, I fucking the movers like the entire time that they're there. And while they're moving in, Frank, as you mentioned before, Frank cuts himself in a very...
No, not Frank, Larry.
Larry cuts himself, and blood goes into the floorboards, and something starts to ooze and form and create, and something comes alive. And that something is Frank.
He's back.
He's back. So, leading up to that point, Austin, what do you think?
So
What are your
good.
thoughts?
Lovely. I love everything. The opening with Frank is a little messy,
Yes.
but it is cool that it's already setting up. Like you notice how all of the candles are shaped in a box.
Mhm.
So it's the whole idea of like being put in a box, and that a lot of characters in this franchise are like seeking like the extreme levels of sensation. You could say they're trying to get out of the box. The nail scene. Do you want to talk about that? Because to me, that's like, having seen this movie many times now, that is probably the most upsetting thing to me. For all of the demonic shit, the gore, the horror on display, it's that moment when Larry's moving the couch that he nicks his hand on the nail that I'm like, ah! Every time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, part of me thinks that's like the most human part of the whole, like, it's the most gruesome human, like,
This is the most relatable thing.
Exactly.
Like the most relatable element of gore in the movie.
exactly. Like, and they were like, Julia was like, oh, don't faint. I'm like, I would have passed out so hard if that happened to me. Like,
Well, with how much blood that he's losing, I think that any human being would pass out after about 3 minutes.
yeah, exactly. And she's just like, oh, Larry.
Larry!
Larry.
This moment also... Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Okay. This moment also is interestingly cut exactly with the moment where she's remembering her and Frank's love affair.
Yes.
That presumably happened right before her marriage to Larry, just to twist the knife.
Well,
but as she's remembering the best sex that anybody's ever had, at least the way she seems to be remembering it, they intercut when he nicks the nail right at the climax.
yes.
which is tying together the pleasure and pain thing early on in the film.
Gotcha. I don't think he actually showed up to the wedding though, Frank, because
You think she imagined that?
no. I think that Frank came, saw that it was his brother's fiance, desired her, fucked her, and then like didn't go to the wedding because like Larry was acting like she had never met Frank throughout it was like, oh, that's just Frank. Like, oh, Frank would do this. Frank would do that.
You're
like,
probably right, honestly.
and like the entire time was like alluding as if she had no idea who Frank was.
Yeah, he's like, oh, that's my crazy brother. He's definitely been here, but he's probably in prison somewhere. We don't need to worry about him.
Meanwhile, she's like, where is he?
My heart.
My heart will go on.
We also skipped over right at the beginning. You get the overture for the film, which I totally love.
It was great. That's the first thing I wrote down. Music is good.
Yeah, and there are some parts of this movie where you can tell they cut some corners, and I think that's sort of just the price you pay to get this level of creative control.
Yes.
But the music is, as good as it gets for any horror franchise, save a Halloween or an Exorcist.
No, I'll say this though, like I don't want to diss it, but like the opening and the closing are so memorable, but everything else during the film was just so captivating that I didn't even notice.
Yeah, it's a lot of mood stuff, but me having revisited the film, I gotta say, it's A1. It's spooky and sinister, and when those strings come in on the main overture, it just gives me goosebumps every damn time.
Yeah.
I think it fits the subject matter perfectly and elevates the entire production.
Yes.
Plus, the sound design is pretty good. I'll admit this is the first time I watched this movie with headphones, and it's a quality production.
Yeah.
Especially like all those like whispers.
Yes.
As like Julia is like turning to the dark side. In the scene where the flashback to her and Frank making love. As things start to heat up, like the whispers start going like, Julia. Love it. Fantastic.
Speaking of Julia, like the entire time I'm sitting here like, how did she end up with Larry? Because there doesn't seem to be anything that she really likes about him. Like she hates being around his friends. Apparently she thinks he's a dope. And
she doesn't like watching boxing.
And she doesn't like having sex with him.
No.
The boy got no game.
I think that is to the film's benefit, though. I think that you need to establish their relationship is like totally loveless. And if they were to like flashback to their wedding day, like maybe you could get something there, especially since she just fucked his brother. But I think that by omitting any flashback or like any scene of them being like a traditional happy married couple, I think that undercuts what the movie is trying to do and probably doesn't really exist because, again, she was having sex. She was cheating on her fiance right before they got married with his brother. Like
yes.
how happy was the marriage going to be at any point after that?
No, it ain't happening. Do we just want to go into the next chapter? Is there anything else you want to cover in this first little bit?
I will point out that there is quite a bit of Christian imagery in the house. You said that there's some like demonic stuff, like upside down crosses or whatever, but there are also a lot of Jesuses.
Well, there's a lot of Jesuses, but there's also a lot of like Antichrist, because I'm pretty sure there's like one, it may not be Christ, but there's like a statue, it looks like Christ, and he's holding Christ's head.
Well, that's probably just a mutilated Jesus statue.
Sure.
Brought to us by one Frank. Uncle Frank.
Uncle Frank.
But I respond to this. This is, again, like a pet theme. And I think that it is further tying down that whole relationship with, like, you have to suffer to experience joy in life, which is no judgment to anyone's religious beliefs, but very much baked into Christianity, particularly Catholicism.
Yeah.
So again, already really laying the groundwork for what this movie is trying to explore.
For sure. I mean, both of us have Christian backgrounds, and we both grew up with the teaching that, like, Christ suffered so that we might enjoy life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's right there.
it's right there.
And it's like the history of, like, flogging oneself,
Yes.
as which I don't think is really a part of any major Christian denomination now.
That we know.
Bryce has given me a look that suggests he might know something I don't.
Do I?
But the point is, there's a long history of that.
Yes. And then there is one thing that I just remembered that I wanted to bring up. When Frank first started forming again, like, the way I viewed it, it was like reverse melting.
That's how they did it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's the monster effect, where most of those shots are reversed.
Okay.
And you almost have to take that sequence, like, shot by shot, because I think some of the effects are excellent, like the same level as, like, John Carpenter's The Thing, which is, like, the gold standard for this kind of thing. And then there are some that you're like, I see how they did that. The strings are clear. What did you think of it?
It was good. Like, it was probably one of my favorite parts of the film, to be honest. Like, the entire time, like, I wasn't thinking, like, oh, something's gonna jump out. Right there.
Yeah, because the music's, like, swelling up. You're like, we're already here.
Yeah.
I'm not anticipating a jump scare.
But it was disturbing, but at the same time, it wasn't disturbing in a bad way, if that makes sense. I don't know. Like, it was just different. I don't think I've really seen anything.
Have you seen John Carpenter's The Thing? I don't think so. Oh, we must watch it. We must watch it sometime. It a lot less sex in that one, and it's excellent, and it has these same effects, that kind of thing, the thing, but top tier, the best that's ever been captured on film,
For sure.
I got the Blu-ray. We'll check it out one day. No dragons.
That's what I was going to ask.
Tell me about the next chapter. Let's keep it moving.
Alrighty. Julia agrees to help Frank restore his body. And Julia starts, fellas, this is why you need to be careful on Tinder out there. Like, she starts meeting guys at bars, bringing them home, kills them, and then Frank takes their body.
Yeah, we got kind of a Little Shop of Horrors element introduced.
Mm-hmm. She does that a couple times. Kirsty sort of discovers, one, that Frank is still alive and he's a monster, and discovering, she first thinks that Julia is cheating. Oh, I mean, she knows that Julia is cheating, but
she thinks that she's caught her in the act of cheating, but the reality of it turns out to be much more sinister.
Yes. And Kirsty escapes the house when Frank attacks her, but she takes the box. And when she has the box, now I am blanking. What? How did she end up in the hospital? Was it?
I mean, I think she just, like, passes out as she's, like, walking along. Like, she might have been injured by Julia or Frank in her escape.
Yeah.
But I believe she's just, like, found and then taken to the institution.
Yeah, and they're, like, arresting her for some reason. Like,
well, you know, she's covered in blood.
Was she covered in blood?
She had some blood on her.
All right.
I mean, Frank, dude has no skin.
Yeah,
Anything
fair,
he touches.
Fair. but they're like acting like she killed someone and locking her in. And she plays with the box like a Rubik's Cube, and she discovers it and opens the gates of hell. She gets chased around by the engineer before she summons the Cenobites.
Okay. I want to talk about a million different things about this movie.
Can we talk about for just a split second why Skylar White from Breaking Bad gets so much shit for being a terrible wife, and Julia I have never heard get brought up in this conversation at all?
Well, I think that has something to do with the levels of exposure.
Yeah.
That, you know, there are a lot of more people digging into Breaking Bad these days than Hellraiser.
For sure.
Also, anybody who wants to talk shit on Skylar White is like needs to like take a hard look at their personal values and the way that they view women. I'll just leave that one right there.
Walter White is a bad man.
He is the villain of the show. To be clear.
Yes.
He's Breaking Bad. He is doing bad things. Honestly, I think she gave him way more slack than he deserved.
I think the criticism they need to be throwing at her is why she put up with him.
Right, but that strengthens your point there, where you have somebody like Julia who is cheating on her husband and then sacrificing totally innocent, horny men to her previously deceased lover to try and resurrect him, even though there's clearly a lot of dark magic going on there.
Not just horny men, but lonely men as well.
The loneliest. Some of these guys, oh my goodness.
Although I did like the one guy's like, you know, I just like to stay wary. Or what did he say? He was like,
you can't be too cautious.
You can't be too cautious. And then it's literally just the next scene of her just
hitting him in the head with the hammer. Also, shout out to Julia's giant star-shaped earrings that are like as big as her head.
Yes.
What a fit. She's really going for it. She knows how to reel him in.
Mm-hmm. But like, Julia is very much the definition of evil stepmother in this movie.
To the T.
Like, the entire time, like, before she started sacrificing men, I was like, you know, she's sort of really cold to her husband for what, again, like, I don't know what Larry does seem like sort of like an idiot and sort of a jackass at times.
He has no idea what's going on the entire movie,
No.
which doesn't paint the most favorable picture.
And he also is sort of that stereotypical 80s husband, which is not exactly, that's not exactly like, why is dinner not being made, honey?
Yeah, he wants his wife to bring him the beer while he's watching the fight with his buddies.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
But at the same time, like, she's over here like,
Oh, why do we have to live in this house? My husband has got me a house.
I will, I also really enjoy, and it's funnier to me every time I rewatch this movie, the moments where his pure cluelessness runs up against things. Because there's that moment where because she has sort of a gradual turn to being like a full-on villain and like
yes.
ready to sacrifice people.
Yes.
You know, at first she gets talked into like, okay, you know, I'll lure some strangers to their doom. But then Frank's like, well, you got a guy right here in your bed, like he'll do. And she's like, no, he's my husband. I can't do that to him. But you know, eventually she gets there. But before, you know, mid transformation there's a scene where she's trying to save him from Frank. And so she's like trying to get him to like to distract him, essentially. She talks him into bed. And then as they're about to start having sex, Frank comes out of the closet with a switchblade. So she's all like, no, you can't do it. But of course, Larry thinks that she's talking to him. And he's just like, you know what? I just don't get you.
Larry, we've all been there, buddy.
Hey, pour one out for poor Larry.
Also, how good is Frank's dick game over here? Like
The best.
like
His technique, impeccable.
I mean, like he's literally his dick is so good. He got a woman to kill other men for him
On the chance that it might get back in working order.
Yeah, like he doesn't even have a dick when she like first does this.
Yeah, we don't need to dig into it.
But like,
He's a hottie though. The like short, the stubble, the spicy look to him. He's got like the tiniest bit of eyeshadow. Dude's hot. I get it. Julia does some bad things, but this particular sin, I understand on a level some of the others don't connect with me.
Does devil worship make you hotter? Is that what?
Ooh, it can. I think that's a bit of a roll of the dice.
It can go one way or it can go another.
Now, when he is in his reduced form, because there's that initial sequence where his body's like reforming, yes, and he's just like a skeleton. Mm-hmm. And then there's when he's like small and like kind of like crawling, shuffling around.
Don't look at me.
That's what I'm saying. I really like that touch where you're getting a sense of his vanity, where, on the one hand, he doesn't care. He's selfish and evil and all of that. But every time that Julia comes in there, his former lover, he's just like, don't look at me. I can't stand to be seen like this.
Now, just on that subject a little bit, is the actor who's Frank when he's all like bad boy out, is that the same that's going on with this reduced?
It's the same guy.
Okay.
I do believe so. And I will double check on that right now because the voice is quite different, but obviously once he's looking like male anatomy model Frank, that he's acting through a lot of makeup.
Yes.
And I'm learning today that can be kind of hard.
Why do you say that, Austin?
We got the cheap stuff. I'll just come out and say it. This is Spirit Halloween. Next time around, I think I'll splurge for the real deal.
The next time we watch Hellraisers on the pod. Hellraiser.
Hey, if you want to do Hellbound, I'll go all out. I'm there. I'll commit.
There's no dragon.
There was a dragon in the series, though. You never know. In Hellraiser 11, it could pop up.
Anyway, there's also this whole side story that's going on with Kirsty where she has a boyfriend. Was he one of the movers or was he not one of the movers?
I'm actually not remembering, but this is like the subplot that's going on through this whole movie. And I have a lot to say about this.
Yeah. And during this subplot, this is where we first meet the homeless. They like in online, I've been seeing, they call him the Vagabond. And there's actually some pretty cool art I've seen out there.
Yeah. The old dude.
Yeah. Like there's one in particular where he's like covered in this like homeless man's blanket and it's just like shadow where his eyes are supposed to be. It's
badass. You'll have to send that to me.
We'll throw it up here, right?
Please. Now that's funny because iconic, absolutely, for being in Hellraiser, the greatest horror movie like ever. But he never appears in any of the other movies. Not even a mention to my memory.
Yeah, you're like, who is this guy? You mentioned though that you had some things to talk about this subplot.
Right. So the story that Kirsty is the movie that she is in prior to the revelation that Frank has risen again and the Cenobites and all of that is, if you read between the lines, it's just kind of like a domestic, like standard drama, coming of age kind of thing. Yeah. Because it's not explicitly stated, but you could read the movie that with this boy that she's meeting, like boyfriend, whatever, they're hanging out. This might be like her first sexual relationship.
Yes.
And maybe even the implication that like there's that Larry calls it the night of the paper hat, which I think it's just like I don't know if you're like celebrating moving into a new place. I think it's a term for that.
Okay.
But they're all having something to drink, and she's like, "Oh my goodness, I need to lay like I can barely stand up." And the boy's like, "Well, then lay down." It's not that sinister, but there's a lot here where it could easily be read that like that was the night that she lost her virginity. And then a lot of this movie, you know, it's taken to an extreme degree and there are demons and all of that, but it is kind of like playing on the anxieties that come with that type of experience and first getting introduced to like this world of pleasure. And then, I mean, shortly after that,
she goes to the hospital.
You see where I'm going with this. But like she wakes up after that night and she's like dreaming of like a baby crying, which becomes more of a reality once you start to have sex. I would imagine, especially so as a woman, that you're like, you know, we're having some fun here, but this is introducing the possibility of a child, which you may or may not be ready for. She also hears the child cries again when she's like going into the Cenobite realm, where she then gets chased by a giant penis monster. Beau is Afraid style. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The consequences of being at the hospital is just horror after horror after horror after.
But you see how that's kind of like a cool sub theme within this movie.
And I was just remembering from the film, I don't know if you caught this, but when she's first on the phone with her dad, she's like, "Hey, I found a place." And he's like, "Oh, how'd you find a place?" Like, "Oh, don't worry, I was able to find a place." Maybe that's inferring that she's moving in with this guy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of reading between the lines here too, so maybe. But regardless, she's a young adult sort of emerging into her own person.
Yes.
And I think that is also represented in the more fantastic parts of this movie.
Yes. No, I completely agree. Anything else that we want to necessarily cover before going into the last chapter?
Which is when the Cenobites appear to Kirsty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. Let's. I will just say I find it really cool when Frank like puts his fingers into his victims and like sucks out their life force.
Yes.
And then you see the corpses of the victims later. It is some of the most horrifying shit in the entire movie.
Okay, I know we mentioned it after we watched the film, but how is Larry not smelling the dead bodies in the house? Like, I get it. There was a lot of gross shit in this house. Dead bodies.
I think that place was musty.
But there's musty and then there's rotting corpses.
He's oblivious. I think it's one of those that I hear you step back from the movie and you're like, no, wait a minute. But it's such a cool movie. And it's one of those that I think you just kind of have to take it if you want this really cool story to work. Also, you know, it's all the way in the attic. They're down sleeping on the main floor. There's also like weird house. A lot of stuff has happened. I'm sure that the like maggoty smell wasn't totally washed out in their initial cleaning.
I'll just say, as someone who's looked at houses and apartments, smell is a lot. And
also, I mean, there were a lot of maggots in that one corpse's mouth. I think that was for horrific effect. It's my understanding of this movie that it takes place over like a week, maybe 2. What did you think? Because it does take a minute to sort of move in.
Yeah.
But if you take essentially the start of the film, like, you know, Frank might have been taken by the Cenobites like months past. But if you take it just from when they move into the house to when they burn down the house and get rid of the box at the end of the movie, I think we're talking
a week.
Maybe a couple weeks.
I don't even think a couple weeks, because like Frank definitely seemed like he was pressuring Julia to like get on with it.
Mm-hmm. And Frank was concerned, but you know, if we're making an effort here to seal up a little crack in the integrity of this plot, that makes it a little bit more plausible that, you know, bodies they look fucked up because Frank sucked out all their life force. They're not necessarily like months decayed, you know. Bodies don't necessarily start to smell until I think the week mark. I don't know. I haven't killed somebody in a really long
time. Well, speaking of which, let's go to the next chapter, the last chapter.
Hit me with it.
So the Cenobites start speaking with Kirsty, saying that they're going to that she summoned her, and so now they're going to show her the realms of pleasure.
They have such sights to show her.
And she starts freaking out and telling them that, hey, Frank escaped you. Don't you want Frank? And that's when they're like, no one escapes from us. And she's like, no, he did. I'll give you if you let me go. And they're like, well, think about it. But it's a good start.
It's like, we will be back. We will circle back on this one.
But it's at this point that Frank is able to convince Julia to kill Larry and sort of steals his skin. But we don't necessarily see that until during the conversation with Kirsty and Julia and Larry / Frank. And I mean, I know it's a whole skin changing thing, but like 2 seconds of looking at the guy, like you could tell.
You can literally see like the marks around his hairline where he has attached the new skin to his body.
Yeah.
But Kirsty's been through a lot in the last 48 hours. I'd understand if she's a little rattled and overlooking some obvious concerns.
And she tries to tell her, like, oh, yes, I killed Frank. Like, Frank is gone. Don't worry. But eventually, Kirsty discovers that it is indeed Frank who killed her father. And the chase ensues. They start going through and hunting her down. And it's the whole horror where people are hiding in rooms. They come in, they come out, the whole shebang. And finally, the Cenobites appear and they start. Oh, Frank. Well, does Frank kill Julia? Like, I don't.
Yes, not on purpose, but yeah.
But she's not dead.
No, she died.
So
the sequel picks up immediately where the first movie left off, and everybody's back, and Julia has to get resurrected, and it is a horrific sequel. It is the most disturbing thing in probably any of these movies.
Okay, good to know. But Julia's dead. Frank killed her. He doesn't really feel too bad for killing her in this moment.
I don't think he feels bad at all.
And the Cenobites capture Frank and start torturing him with the hooks and everything again. And the Cenobites then turn their attention on Kirsty. And she starts using the orb to like pokeball them away. And at this point, her boyfriend does come into the house as it's falling apart and getting disintegrated. And eventually she gets rid of all of the Cenobites as the house collapses. They decide to burn the house down. And what's this? The homeless man appears. And they first throw the box into the bonfire, the remnants of the house. And then the homeless man comes, grabs the box, engulfs in flames, and from it, the bone dragon appears and takes off into the night. And it zooms in on the box, and the process repeats itself back in Morocco. The cycle repeats itself.
It's kind of a stupid ending. I'm prepared to admit it. It's a little tacked on, but I mean, that's like, you have to have the whole like final freak out at the end of these movies. I feel like that was a demand, but if you wanted money to make a horror movie, that was a requirement.
Well, for me, like, has there ever been a horror film that start to finish is just perfection?
Ooh, I'd make a case for The Ring. Have you seen The Ring? Personal favorite of mine. But I'm a Gore Verbinski head, so I'm biased. I think others would make a case for The Exorcist, but I do not care for the opening of The Exorcist. I think the first 10 minutes, which take place in Iraq, are unnecessary and sort of at odds with the rest of it. So other than that, I would say you could say The Exorcist, but nothing else is really leaping to mind. Horror is a tricky genre.
Yeah. Because I feel like, and we talked about this after. So we just have to live stream all moments of our lives because we have the best of conversations.
We do.
But we were just talking about how it really seems like with horror, there's such a big chance of making it big. So people will just throw literally spaghetti against the wall, hoping that it sticks. And
Yeah, you also, like, horror, you can produce it cheap. And if you know what you're doing, you can produce it well cheap and result in a great profit.
yes.
So there are a lot of amateurs out here trying to make that happen that just produce schlock, like garbage.
And to quote Jonah Hill, the whole purpose of the movie industry is to make garbage movies make money.
Low key. Although I will say that, I was a very fretful child. A big time scaredy cat. Like, if you'd have showed this movie to me at 13, it would have ruined my life.
Yeah.
So
Same.
just there's hope for everybody. But I have sort of tried to build up a bit of a tolerance to it, and found that really rewarding as I've dug into some of the classics like Hellraiser here. But I feel like in our modern day, horror is truly the most significant form of pop film art that is doing outside the box shit. Like taking weird swings, experimenting with the form. That is still happening in the horror genre to a degree that is totally missing in like fantasy films or adventure or action, romantic stuff on that like popular wide release level.
Well, I feel like with fantasy, romantic, adventure movies, there's almost a formula. Like, yeah, there's a rough formula with horror, but you can do anything with horror.
It's the Jason Blum thing, like Blumhouse, though. It's like so you're telling me I can make a movie like for $2 million and it can make 200 million if I do it right?
It's a lottery system.
Like I don't care. Like we can make 40 of them. We only need 1 or 2 to like actually make money, and we're in the black.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Now this is like almost reversing where we came from on this, talking about how the ending is kind of formulaic, but this movie has so much originality to it, and I'm not going to say that it's a disastrous ending, especially considering the ending of some of the later films in the franchise.
Well,
it's warmed me up to it.
Here's my thought, and maybe I'm incorrect for thinking this, but I want your thoughts on this. If they would have ended Hellraiser with just the one film, I feel like the ending wouldn't be, I don't want to say as bad, but it wouldn't be as corny. Or
sure,
because
it would at least make a greater degree of sense.
Yeah. Because it's, to me, when you do this, it's just showing like, okay, like on to the next sucker who's going to be getting pulled into this whole thing. Right? Like, I always blank on the name of the horror film that, again, I'm not going to watch again, but I like that we watched together. Sinister. Like, it's that idea with Sinister. That family,
I think that's the horror default. And that's part of like, as much as there is a formula, the formula of a good spook is that you need to create a horror that is eternal and inescapable. It's that overwhelmingness that people respond to.
Yeah.
So the most straightforward way to do that with the ending is to suggest that this whole horrific process that you just witnessed, it's just part of a cycle that has happened many times before and will continue to happen for many times yet. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's done well, sometimes not so much.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Rewinding a little bit, though, back to Kirsty meeting the Cenobites for the first time. Mm-hmm. She strikes a deal. Did they go to the pet shop before or after this happens?
Pet shop was earlier in the film.
Okay,
Because the Cenobites don't actually go to the pet shop. It's the homeless man who goes to the pet shop.
Yeah, and he's eating the crickets.
And he's eating the crickets.
Disgusting.
Nasty.
Now, first thing, I did just have to point out that that is pretty radical that this local pet shop sells monkeys.
That's what I was thinking as well. I'm like, or maybe just the 80s were different.
I wasn't there. But, let us know.
Could you just go down to your local pet shop?
Big old boas as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you can eat the crickets right out of the thing if you want to.
No one can stop. No one's going to stop you. They'll just kick you out.
This is the one aspect to this movie that is not really up my alley. The whole like bug gross out angle. It's effective. Like it bothers me, but I don't find it as productive as the other messed up stuff here. How do you fare with that?
I agree. Like I generally don't do well with insects or bugs. Like I don't like them.
I had a leopard gecko as a kid, and it was traumatic every time I had to dig into the crickets and like put one out for it to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Did not care for that.
No, did not care for it at all. I generally don't like bugs. Like I don't think there are any bugs that I'd even praying mantises that are cool. I'm just like,
we got Google.
Yeah.
We have the National Geographic.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just disturbing. And there's almost something primal, I feel like. And again, I'm taking this outside of the movie, but I feel like there's almost like a gut reaction. The general public don't do well with bugs.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like baked in. There's something like the tiny legs and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And where, on paper, that's what these movies are trying to do. They're trying to make you uncomfortable. They're trying to elicit a response. Yeah. I understand that there's going to be a lot of overlap between people who are interested in seeing a human being torn to smithereens by chains, which I find awesome, and people who enjoy seeing like a table full of food that's covered in maggots.
Yeah.
Which I am not so much into.
Which is sort of funny because people tell me that the way I feel about seeing bugs, whether it's maggots, crickets, spiders, any of those bugs, is how other people feel whenever they see snakes. And for me, I love snakes. Like a snake is probably the one pet that I've always wanted, but never did get one. But
they're great pets, man. I have a snake, as you know, get to make an appearance on the podcast, but surely will one day.
Eventually.
They're great pets, man. They're not the most loving, but they're very easy.
Yeah.
You have to feed them once every week or two. They kind of keep to themselves. They're low maintenance. Yeah. I have a ball python, and she's never bit me or anybody else. Just down to hang out when you want to. Put her back in the tank. It's cool. Would recommend. But so I'm with you too. Although I think that the discomfort with bugs exists on a level beyond the discomfort with snakes for most people.
I agree, but I do see people. But I'm more coming at it like I can see why somebody be like, oh, I don't have a problem with bugs at all, because I'm over here like, oh, I don't have a problem with snakes at all, or reptiles in general. There's some people that can't handle reptiles at all. And, I don't know if they're listening to the podcast.
So what's the absolute worst for you? It's probably within the realm of bugs.
See, we're going to go into some lore real quick. I have to say spiders. And it's just because when I was younger, I did this scouting camp out where you spend the week up in the mountains, and for the last night, you have to is it geocache where you put in coordinates and you go off finding?
Yeah.
So you had to geocache to your campsite location and like backpacking. And there were no leaders there until like the leaders would go and find you. Like you're supposed to go and do this on your own.
How'd it go?
I mean, it was fun, But I mean, as great as you can imagine, like 14-year-old boys in the middle of the woods going. For me, I thought to myself, like, you know what? I don't want a backpack with a lot of stuff. Like, I'll just bring the bare minimum. So my sleeping bag, a small tent, and that's it. And I think
A gallon of lube. And
not that camp trip. But that night, I set up the tent, and the tent was a very crummy tent. And so the door wasn't like shutting properly, and it was really cold, and I kept waking up. And at one point in the night, I woke up and there were like 8 spiders just crawling all over my sleeping bag. And I got up and like freaked out and ran out and like I'll still have dreams of just waking up and seeing just spiders just crawling all over my body. So like for me, it's like it has more to do with like it's an ongoing nightmare that I have, as well as
you had that one terrifying experience, like that trauma though. That's yeah. I mean, that's gonna top anything else.
Yeah.
For me, it's probably, and this is weird because it's not so visual, but the idea of ticks bothers me so much. Like I used to lay up in bed as a child and just worry that I was going to get bit by a tick. I was also just parasitic organisms in general. I was also constantly worrying about getting head lice or contracting a tapeworm. Mm-hmm. None of which ever happened to me, thank goodness. But it bothers me on a level beyond anything else in this world.
No, I agree. I mean, you saw where my grandparents used to live, like, and I'd get ticks. I think that's more where I got just used to them, because I'd get ticks all the time, and we'd just get home from playing out in the woods, and my parents were like, "All right, we need to look over you, make sure you don't have any ticks." And if they did have any ticks, my grandpa would go and put like pliers in the fire, heat them up. So
that's how you do it.
Before we move on, one last one. I don't have a problem with actually seeing these bugs, but whenever you get close-ups, there's something that like deeply disturbs me, and it's grasshoppers.
Ooh,
like,
yeah.
Visually, grasshoppers are so like
their heads.
Yes. Like,
what is going on there?
I don't understand it. It's more disturbing to me than spider heads. And
no, I know what you're saying there. That, like, I see grasshoppers, and I know that their biology is programmed for them to thrive in their own experience, but it's hellish.
Yes.
To me, to imagine their existence and like this is their body.
Yes.
Oh.
So again, for my anime babies out there that love this, Jujutsu Kaisen, amazing show. Love the show. Don't at me. Great show. But these demons, these creatures pop up, and a lot of them are being manifested through like evil things or like disasters in the world. And there's one that's the manifestation of like locusts. And it's pretty much just this giant humanoid grasshopper. And he's a comical character, but for me, he's just so disturbing, because like literally his whole thing is like, I'm hungry. Like, I'm here to devour as everything. And like
this feels like a spin on the Fly, the David Cronenberg The Fly, which is the story of a man whose DNA is combined with a fly, and so he gradually starts to turn into like a human fly monster. It is one of the very best movies ever made, and it is thoroughly disgusting.
But I feel like we deviated a little bit from
we're still kind of in the realm of what this movie's about.
Yeah,
but we can get back to it. I don't have much to say on Kirsty's interaction with the Cenobites. She gets the extension. I love the image of Bloody Frank smoking the cigarette so fucking much. It is the coolest thing. And I do need to issue a bit of a correction here, because earlier I indicated that Sean Chapman played Frank in both forms. Looking at IMDb, the actor Oliver Smith is credited as Frank the Monster. Now, I'm not entirely clear if that means that he is the guy in the human anatomy makeup or if he's the guy that's like crawling around in his like initial form, but it does look like we have different actors portraying that one character.
We'll look more into it.
My bad on that. If we need additional context, I will drop in and edit.
But
I love the image of him smoking the cigarette, and also when you see him in the suit later. So badass.
Yes, it does look good.
Also a very Clive Barker image. If you know, you know.
I do just want to ask you again, being our lore expert for Hellraisers, the Cenobites say that they can't go to hell. So are they not in hell, or are they like in the purgatory realm where they're not in hell, but they're not in, like, obviously they're not in heaven, but
that is a tricky thing to answer. So the realm that they come from is routinely referred to as hell, but it bears almost no resemblance to like the Christian idea of hell. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily outlined what happens to like human beings after they die in this world.
Yeah.
So when he says they can't go to hell, it's more like hell as we understand it is already their home, I think is what old Pinhead's getting at with that one.
Okay. Because I think there was like, she was like, go to hell. Well, you can't. Mm-hmm. We can't go to hell.
And they explore that a lot more in the sequel, where you go to the world of the Cenobites, and there are like some elements I like more than others, but the gist of it is there is this giant diamond shaped thing that's like spinning in the middle of this world that is their god, and then most of the world is this like enormous labyrinth.
Gotcha. So I do have questions on the lore that I want to ask you, but I want to sort of save that in the final thoughts. Is there anything else that we want to cover before we hit our final thoughts in this last chapter?
I'm double checking my notes here. Oh, I did write down that every time they summon the Cenobites, that deep chime, the whole boom, boom, sends shivers down my spine every single time.
Smoke.
It is wonderful. And that's, again, credit to the music work and the sound design throughout all of this. The only other thing that I really want to dig into is just how much I love Frank with the skin. Once they've killed Larry. And so at this point, it is actor Andrew Robinson, who plays Larry throughout most of the movie, is now playing Frank. So if I'm understanding this correctly, it's actually 3 actors that portray Frank throughout the film.
I love when actors do a whole switcheroo, like FaceOff.
One of the best movies.
Like, honestly, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Not
Is this a Bruce Willis moment?
Well, I mean, it's not Nicolas Cage, but it's the other one.
John Travolta.
Yeah, John Travolta, when he's pretending to be Nicolas Cage's character. Amazing.
I don't know if any actor has had more fun in a role ever.
No, I don't because John Travolta's like I'm like, he's borderline sucks before.
Yeah.
Like, and then once he makes the switch, like, he's incredible.
His whole like Papa's got a brand new bag scene with Sean Archer's daughter. And that's another connection between the two, because he's got the switchblade that he keeps whipping around just like Frank.
Mm-hmm. But I love, remind me what the actor of Larry is.
Andrew Robinson.
Andrew Robinson, when he's portraying Frank, like, probably my favorite performance in the film.
Low key. And it's so funny because he's such a doof. He's such a goof earlier in the movie. And then you see, oh no, this dude has range. Like, all of that was clearly intentional. And when he's doing the whole "come to daddy," just absolutely eating it up.
Yeah. Like, I don't know what it is. I love these, like, when actors have to switch it up. Like,
but I think that's part of the fun, is when a sort of hammy scenery chewing performance is done well, And I think that when one performer has established the character through a film, especially when it's like such a sinister sort, like we're talking about with Frank, when another actor then gets to step into that, it opens up some room for them to do that really well.
Yes.
To kind of ham it up and have fun. And this is one of my favorite examples of that.
No, I think that's great.
I also, to sort of finish up some thoughts here
ahead.
on Frank and Julia, I enjoy when villains are just so evil, like unapologetically evil. And that is baked into this movie. Julia is even better in the sequel, where she's become a villain. She's just owning it at that point, and it is so damn fun, even though I do have some problems with that movie. We don't have time to get into all of them. But her and Frank, both of them, classic villains in my book. And I mean, this is to say nothing about the Cenobites, who are like embodiments of evil and like representations of ultimate wickedness.
Well, I think there's something more satisfying about, like, I shouldn't say satisfying. Like, humans have such a range where you can have someone be so good, but then we see people that are so evil. While the Cenobites seem to be like, okay, they're almost embodiments of evil. Like, we find out later on, apparently, that they used to be human and they're now this form. But up to this point in this movie, they're just these.
Well, in a way, they're probably the most well-intended of all the quote-unquote villains of this first movie, because they just want to, like, they enjoy sensation.
Yes.
And are totally oblivious to that humans don't enjoy certain sensation. They just want to share these wonderful experiences they have, you know? It's like you put all the pins in your face and you're just constantly bleeding. That's wonderful to them. Everybody should have a taste of that.
If they say so.
That's birthday shit.
But like that's sort of the realm that I'm sort of getting at, though. Like, humans have that complexity to have like that range. And I think that's why they're just so much more satisfying, because they're you see certain villains that pop up that people really latch onto, and some people will say like, hey, the ones that they really love more are not necessarily creatures that are just evil in nature, but humans or humanoids that have that range where they sort of become could have been a hero, but went on this trajectory to be a villain. And I'm not saying that Julia and Frank could have been heroes, but they're humans who went down a path of evil.
It's the fall from grace.
Yes.
It's just the classic trope. And
yes.
It is wonderful. Wonderfully executed in this film. Do you have any other thoughts before I would relish the opportunity to talk about the franchise as a whole for a minute, and we got a dragon grade.
Yeah.
But any other thoughts from you on the film?
No, like I said, I can see that this is a good film. I did enjoy it. I will never watch this movie again.
Fair. I do also want to point out to you, because I feel like a lot of the special effects at the end of the movie, when she's like fighting the Cenobites with the box, are pretty rough.
Yeah.
It is understood that they were like totally out of money by the point that they had to start doing the post-production on that. And most of those effects were done by hand by Clive Barker and one other guy in like 48 hours. So if that helps you forgive some of the rougher moments there, that's the behind the scenes.
I really don't mind. Like, for me, like, yes, I know I've stated before that I have a struggle and a hard time watching older animation or older special effects. But if the story is good enough, it doesn't really matter to me. It's just when the story is a little slower and it has the negative, like, that's when it's like, okay. I think we've talked about it again before. Like, if the story is engaging enough, like, it's the same idea when we were talking. What movie was it that we were talking about? Oh, with Damsel. Like, we're pointing out all the negative things that are coming up because there's not a lot of other things to buy it into.
Yeah, I mean, that's the classic thing, that it's like story, character, visuals, probably in that order. And if you have those on lock, then the rest will just kind of fall in line. And any time that we start to pick apart other elements, it usually just stems from a lack of one of those three.
And I would even say like, hey, like if two of those are even locked in, like you can still get away with it.
Yeah, fully agree. And, you know, I think this movie succeeds on pretty much all those levels.
Yeah.
If I may say so myself.
No, so I want to give you your chance to go into the lore a little bit.
All right, so major spoilers for the Hellraiser franchise as a whole, but you want to hear about where this wild and wacky and woolly franchise goes?
Let's hear it.
Okay, so you've seen Hellraiser, classic film, pretty well contained. You know, I think it tells a complete story, but there's opportunity to go even deeper. So in Hellbound, the first follow-up, this is where I already said there's Dr. Chenard, and he's this wicked dude who's running this corrupt asylum, and he's like he's in search of like the greatest degree of sensation. And
naturally,
one thing leads to another. He gets possession of the box. He resurrects Julia in one of the most horrific things I've ever seen in any movie ever. I love it. And there's also one of the things I really don't like in that movie is there's a young girl character in the asylum who doesn't talk, who becomes a big part of the movie, and I could just do entirely without that character. But the cool thing there is Clive Barker is still heavily involved with the franchise. He didn't direct, but producer, providing a lot of the story elements, and you get all of that context on the Cenobites, where they come from, specifically like details on Pinhead's backstory, all of that. Pretty cool. Essential viewing if you enjoyed this movie. And these two are very much of a piece with each other. The second movie ends with Pinhead trapped in what is called the Pillar of Souls, which is where the third movie picks up, Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth, where Pinhead is trapped in the Pillar of Souls, which gets bought as an art piece by this like millionaire fuckboy day trader dude who totally sucks.
Okay.
Hellraiser 3 is the one that definitely takes on the most like overt slasher structure, where they're latching onto Pinhead and they're turning him into like a Jason or a Freddy. And, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of most of those movies, so to me, this is a dip in the franchise. Although there is one scene when he's like unleashed and he just gets to like murder like 50 people and it is glorious. This one I will knock because I'm trying to just plow through these. This one I will knock because it has the worst Cenobites. And I'll put up some pictures on the screen here because they are gruesome, but honestly not gruesome enough. It is such a symptom of its time where the Cenobites are created from existing characters in the world, which is not really in continuity with the franchise, but whatever. So there's a camera guy and he gets turned into a Cenobite. So there's like a camera that's like in his head. And you know what his Cenobite name is?
Camera
Head. And to go along with this, there's another guy that his whole, like, all his gore elements is because he has a bunch of CDs that are, like, stuck in his head. And so do you know what his name is?
CD Head.
CD Head. So, Whack Cenobites, not my favorite movie, but fun if you like slashers. Things heat up in Hellraiser 4, Bloodline, which is insane. This movie is so off the rails, and I love it so freaking much. Do you want to hear about Bloodline?
Let's hear it.
So it has 3 different stories that it is telling.
Okay.
It is the first story is in the year 2127.
Okay.
It is following a descendant of Philip Lemarchand, who is also in another one of the stories. So he is a descendant of the man who made the puzzle box, and he is on a spaceship which has been constructed in the Elysium configuration so that he can finally, like, using robots and science, summon Pinhead and finally destroy him and close the gates of hell. This is 1/3 of the movie. The next story is in the present, which is actually in the 90s, but, you know, which is another of the descendants, so an ancestor of the guy in the future, but still a descendant of the creator, hence bloodline. And he is an architect who has constructed a new building that is in the lament configuration. Now, the lament configuration is when you open the puzzle box to solve it, you turn it into the lament configuration. So the lament configuration is evil.
Okay.
In summary. So that is to say the Elysium configuration that the Future Man is putting together is like the anti-configuration to that. The final story follows Philip Le Marchand, who is in Paris, France in 1796 and is commissioned by a rich, like, bureaucrat dude. He's a toy maker. Le Marchand is a toy maker. And he is commissioned to make this intricate puzzle box because the dude wants to summon demons and live forever and all that shit. And that is where they introduce Angelique, the demon. Also, Adam Scott is in this movie of Parks and Rec fame.
Which one is that?
Could a depressed person make this? No, you'd recognize him.
I'm sure.
And all of this is intercutting, and it all connects, and it's kind of a mess, but also this is the movie that introduces the Cenobite dog, which is awesome. And I already talked about Angelique, and there's also the Cenobite twins, which there are a pair of twins that get turned into Cenobites, and it, like, the way that they do this is Pinhead, like, twists their, like, bodies together. It's wicked, man. People hate on this movie. It is under 90 minutes, and it accomplishes everything that I'm talking about here. If you like Hellraiser, give Bloodlines a try. Like, I would watch Bloodlines before Hell on Earth if you're only getting 3 of these in. Underrated. In fact, there's a... here, I have another bit of trivia that I... you having fun here, Bryce?
I am having so much fun, Austin.
For real?
I love lore.
I do too! Isn't this already insane?
This is...
We have 4 more movies.
I thought you said that there were 6 more movies.
So there are 8 movies starring Doug Bradley as Pinhead. And I have only watched those. There is another movie that was made as a means to retain the rights to Hellraiser, which is universally hated.
Gotcha.
It is disastrous. Like, $15,000 budget, just political, like, nobody even really acknowledges it exists.
Could have been a YouTube video.
Yes. So I wanted to also point out that while I enjoy Hellraiser Bloodline a great deal, it is actually disowned by its own director.
Oh, really?
And yeah, the Directors Guild of America has a policy where if you feel as a director that a film got away from you, like, you don't want your name on it, you can credit it to Alan Smithy. This film is credited to Alan Smithy.
Is Alan Smithy a person?
No, it's just like this non-entity that you can credit your trash to.
Okay.
I feel like every department should have one.
I need an Alan Shivy.
But you know, with all credit to Kevin Yeager, the film's actual director, I think you put together a solid picture. I appreciate it. Now, I will say these first 4 hold together and keep a continuity that totally falls apart past this point.
Okay.
So it makes sense that, like, Arrow Video, they put out a 4-film set. And this is like the proper Hellraiser canon to me, these 4. Past this point, you have director Scott Derrickson coming in for Hellraiser 5, Hellraiser Inferno, which, in my opinion, is the second best Hellraiser movie. Not everyone agrees with me on this, but I think that it is superbly directed, and it follows a corrupt police detective who is attempting to track down a serial killer called the Engineer, who is, of course, later revealed to be Pinhead. It's a different take on it, but it is working with the established lore and understanding of Pinhead and then doing something different with it.
Gotcha.
The visuals are really good. The Cenobites are cool. There's more of the kind of, like, hands going underneath the skin effect that, like, Frank does in this movie, but more artfully deployed. And also director Scott Derrickson would go on to do like big Hollywood productions. He recently came out with the movie The Black Phone, which I liked a great deal, starring Ethan Hawke. So accomplished director, really great movie. And if you're only going to watch one other Hellraiser movie besides this one, I would recommend either Hellbound or Inferno. How about that?
I'll just say the biggest thing that I got from that is, of course, you'd like a movie with Ethan Hawke.
Oh, yeah, he's my boy. Not many dragon movies with Ethan Hawke, to my knowledge, but maybe we'll find one.
You could look that up.
He's
No,
still
I
working.
genuinely do love lore. Like, again, we'll get to the dragon grade, but I love learning about the lore. I'm sure there's a lot about this particular lore that I really want to dive into. Like, one thing that I just want to ask and sort of figure out, does Frank become a Cenobite, or does he just...
He does not.
Okay.
Which could have been a neat twist. I see where you're going with that, especially if he got like magic powers.
Yeah.
What I wish had happened is I wish that at some point Julia had become a Cenobite.
Ooh, yes. Because again, they probably have something in the works like this, but I could see, like, especially if you're taking that, either Frank or Julia, again, I haven't seen the second one, so it may make more sense to have Julia do this, become the new Cenobite leader. Like, because, like you said, the Cenobites are more just, they're evil, but they're not malicious evil. They're just...
They're evil based on our understanding and experience of the universe.
Yes. While Julia and Frank would have been evil on top of the...
Yeah, they understand human customs and reject them.
Yes. So that could have been a fun direction that they
Who's
take.
worse? You decide. Comment below.
Comment below.
I can round out... did you have more questions?
Do they just die then?
Who?
Frank and Julia.
So yes, essentially. Now, a big part of this is that, again, Clive Barker wanted Julia to be like the focus of the franchise, but it sounds like Claire Higgins, the actress, wasn't interested in returning to the franchise past this point. So that's probably where that comes in.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So she after she's resurrected, she gets her skin back, and there's a very fun bit with her death where they like slide her skin off, and then because of that she like can't hang on and like falls to her doom in the labyrinth. It's lovely. It's lovely.
I love that you love that stuff, Austin.
Now, the last 3 Hellraiser movies are arguably cash grabs. They're all directed by Rick Boda, and they're kind of Hellraiser movies in name only. It is understood that from Inferno on, all of the Hellraiser movies have been scripts that existed that were then reworked to be Hellraiser movies. So they kind of inserted Pinhead and Cenobite elements into them. Just to keep them super quick on this, for anyone who's interested but not interested enough to actually watch the movie, the first one is technically Hellraiser 6 is Hellraiser Hellseeker, which stars Dean Winters of the Allstate Mayhem commercials. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. I'm a bear. You're camping. You don't have car insurance. You know.
Well, you'll be watching out for mayhem, like me.
Mm-hmm. Strange seeing him in a movie.
I feel like I've seen him in something else, but that's neither.
He is definitely not the worst part of this movie. And in fact, this is the movie where Ashley Lawrence returns as Kirsty. Not the time to re-enter the franchise, in my opinion, but hopefully she got some money. It sounds like she didn't. But this one it kind of sucks. It's boring. It's a terrible looking movie.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. And honestly, he's a character who has amnesia, and this is just getting in the way of him accomplishing anything the entire movie.
Okay.
It is a chore. Would not recommend that one. The follow-up, Hellraiser Deader, I would say is the best of the Boda movies, and this one follows a reporter who is investigating a resurrection death cult that is, of course, tied up with the Cenobites and all that. There's a bit that's neat. There's like a demon, like sex train thing with like monsters and people doing weird shit that she ventures into. That's a neat sequence, but also a very skippable movie. And the final one is Hellraiser Hellworld. And this movie is ridiculous because it is about a group of teenage gamers, I'm going to say, who are into a video game that is based on Hellraiser. And one of their friends kills themselves because they want to like be hardcore and be like Pinhead or become a Cenobite or something. And then they all meet up and like go to this like Hellraiser Hellworld themed party that turns out to be this like masterminded, like orchestrated thing for them all to get murdered. And it has what might legitimately be the worst twist ending I've seen in any movie ever. Do you want to hear about it?
Let's hear it.
So it's revealed at the end of the movie that actually the entire movie was in their heads, and they have all been drugged and are buried in coffins outside of the manor, and they have cell phones taped to their heads, and that is how they're communicating to each other, and they keep hallucinating. And anybody who died, it's just because they thought that they died. And if you think about any of this, for I'm going to say 2 seconds, the entire movie falls apart.
Fair.
Would not recommend that one either. But that's as far as I've gone with the Hellraiser franchise. Again, there are 2 other movies. The remake is quite good. But that went on a bit longer than I meant to. But I just wanted to share the joy and the journey that I have gone through with this franchise.
Hey, Austin, I'll just say this. I feel like it's only fair because how many times have I explained the Game of Thrones books to you? But I'm pretty sure there's one time I talked to you for an hour just talking about.
Regardless, maybe I'll cut that down a little bit in the edit, but that's out there for somebody who wants to keep up. Maybe your boyfriend's into it and you want an insight into the lore. Or girlfriend. Either way.
But speaking of getting more into the lore, I don't know if that's really a good segue, but we have a dragon grade to do.
We sure do. So this is going to be a grade for the Hellraiser. I'm putting him as, what was that term?
Vagabond?
The Vagabond. Or do you want to do Vagabond / Skeleton Dragon?
Let's just do the Vagabond.
Cool. I'm down with that.
I don't think we're ever going to get a dragon named Vagabond.
No, I'm gonna need spell check on that one, but oh no, I got it right. Sweet. Alrighty. Now I think I'm actually leading the charge on this one, if I may.
Austin, what did you give it on a scale of 0 to 10 for design?
So we're talking about the dragon form.
Yes.
I think, which again, I will put up the actual figure I think is on screen for about 3 seconds.
Yes.
I don't mind the design.
Yeah.
It's holds together. I think it is clearly a dragon, but it has sort of a spooky angle to it. Mm-hmm. And it's like demonic and skeleton-y. And from a design standpoint, it's kind of what you would expect with that concept, but it works for me. So I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. What did you think?
No, I genuinely do enjoy, I call it the necrotic dragons.
Sure.
Especially in D&D when liches show up or just evil sorcerers show up on skeleton dragons. There's something aesthetically that's just awesome, especially where in a lot of these cases, they're more of like an extension to the lich or the sorcerer wizard. But this person clearly is some sort of guardian or just caretaker of the box. And I'd love it if it was a little bigger. I would have loved to get more looks at it, but I gave it a 6 as well.
Skuvlaka's Ven.
Skuvlaka's Ven. But special effects, Austin.
Now, it's going to suffer a little bit more here.
Yeah.
And while I do think that the special effects in this movie do reach very high heights, this is not what I would describe as one of them. It does feel to me like even if this was a puppet, its range of motion was very limited, and it feels like they were running into trouble with it. Like it's 1 or 2 shots where we actually see it proper, and then when it's flying off, it's just like its point of view. So it's not a disaster, and I think having all the flames around it helps, but I'm going with a 4 out of 10 on this category.
Skluvaka Sven, Austin. I agree. Like, it's really not, like, I like what they do for the 3 seconds that it's there, but we both have already discussed they were out of money at this point in time. So to ask for them to do more was just completely out of the picture. I would have loved to see more of it. And I think if we would have gotten more, and if they had the budget to even just extend the scene so it was a 2-minute scene with it, like, I feel like it would have scored a lot better, but I gave it a 4 as well.
Yeah, it's a little tacked on, but it's just disappointing because imagine them giving the same degree of care to this creature that they did to the engineer.
Yes.
For example. Like, it was within their capability. It really does just feel like a budget thing.
Yes, I agree.
Now, the character, I'm going to give him some points here by extension of the Vagabond. Like, the old homeless man is weird and eerie. He doesn't speak, really, and honestly doesn't have that much bearing on the plot other than to spook Kirsty here and there. But I think he adds something to it and sort of has a personality. And, you know, based on his actions throughout the film, it actually kind of makes sense at the end when it's revealed that he was a necrotic dragon monster the entire time. So to me, that translates to a good character, and I'm giving it a 6 out of 10.
See, I think you're a little more generous on that front than I necessarily am, because we really don't get in my opinion, we don't get too much out of him, because I still don't even really understand what he is. Like, is he a guardian? Is he there to fight the Cenobites? Is he there to, like, what is his deal? Like,
I desperately wish that I could fill you in on this lore, but I'm telling you, it's just not there.
Exactly. Like,
maybe in the Hellbound Heart, I could give that the book.
It just really seems like he's just there to be like, all right, like, the Cenobites went back to hell, gonna just collect and go. Like, but at the same time, throughout the movie, it's giving off the vibes that he's like a guardian angel, but he really doesn't do anything to give off guardian angels. I'm not going to say it's a bad character, but I'm giving it a 4.
Ooh. Like, 4 out of 10 from Bryce. That's a bit of a hit, but pressing on the film. This is one of my favorite films. 10 out of 10. No. It's like, I can acknowledge there are flaws in it, but to me, this is an incredible movie that I love revisiting. It's more rewarding with every watch. It's a 10 to me. I'm not expecting that from you, but I'm just being honest.
Okay. I'm glad that you said you weren't expecting it from me, because it is not a 10 out of 10 for me. Like I said, I genuinely see that this is a good movie. I hate horror. I don't like watching movies to get scared. Like, I don't want to get scared. I don't want to be disturbed. Like, call me. I want to have that feeling of hope. I want to have that closure of, like, a happy story. Call me a child.
He has no darkness within him.
There's enough darkness.
Bryce, are you a genuinely happy person?
I'd say from time to time, yes.
I thought they went extinct.
But I recognize this is a good movie.
And I just want to drive this home for the listener that this was kind of big, that Bryce even agreed to watch this movie with it and with me. And I appreciate you kind of trying to see where it's coming from and acknowledging, like, the craft on display, and just, I feel like you've honestly given it a fair shake. So whatever number you're about to say, I accept it, and I appreciate you going on this journey with me.
0. Just kidding. It's a 6. It's a 6.
Okay. I can dig it. Yeah, that's acceptable, especially because, like, I went the 10.
Well, Austin, there's only one more.
X Factor.
The X Factor.
This is a different dragon. This is a sort of like interdimensional cosmic entity skeleton dragon. We haven't seen any of those yet. Yeah. He exists in a human form that does not seem to really exist the way that most human dragons are, where that's kind of the the default is like when a dragon takes on a human form, they're like this irresistible human being that just has this aura about them, and they're
powerful,
articulate, and they're like kingly, and none of that is here. He's just over here chowing down on grasshoppers, waiting for his chance to take the demon cube back to his master. And again, the design is unusual, so to me, this is an 8 out of 10 on the X Factor.
No, for me, we've seen, like, we have the experience, the one where a human does transform into a dragon. This is unique that we're seeing that it is a skeleton dragon. I do think that there's going to be a couple that may pop up, especially more in the television realm than in the movie realm. But again, I feel like I would have given it, we just did not get a lot, like, from the 3 seconds that we saw from it.
Well, yeah, most of me giving that score is extrapolating to the Vagabond character.
No, and I get it. I respect that. For me, I'm giving it a 6. I think it's good. I think it's a very unique dragon. I'm not going to go say it's what was it? Great. That's what 8 is. 8 is great.
Mm-hmm.
Which, Austin, final score.
You're talking 6 out of 10. That is awful fitting because the Vagabond / Skeleton Dragon in Hellraiser's final score is now coming out to an even 6 out of 10.
Which is good.
Yeah. And honestly, that feels about right to me. I think, gut check, that's about where I would have put this dragon.
Yeah.
But that's that. We've talked Hellraiser. We did what we came here to do. Happy Halloween.
Let's get on to turkey season.
Yeah, I got a Mayhem concert in 20 minutes here.
Austin, do we want to let everybody know about the big news for next week, or do we want to spice it up a little?
Oh, no, let them know. Let them know. Because we've already recorded it. It's a great episode that you absolutely will not to miss about a banger film. What's coming up, Bryce?
Guys, we are watching our first Ghibli, Halibli, Polylibi film, Spirited Away. But there is going to be, Austin, before we go any further, is there anything notable that you want to talk about this podcast real quick?
Oh, yeah. So today's notable first is that I am in corpse makeup.
That is,
I don't know, first horror movie on the podcast. Might be the last. I don't know. Happy Halloween. But a very big notable first coming up next week.
We are going to be having Kimmy from the Alluring podcast as our first guest on the pod. If you're not familiar with the Alluring podcast, the Alluring Network, they discuss folklore. I strongly recommend that you go and check their stuff out. Kimmy and Ryan, they do an amazing job discussing folklore, monsters. Very much up. I would assume if you guys enjoy what we do, you're going to love what they do. So
check them out. They are an audio only podcast, but you can listen to that on any platform. So highly recommended. And as I already said, the podcast is in the can. We recorded it. I thought it went great. Yes. I think it is one of our very best records. So excited for everybody to hear that.
Oh, I agree. You'll also notice that my beard is longer than that one.
Is the way it goes. Do you have a prompt for the audience before we head out? What do you want to know from the people?
What do you guys thought? What are your thoughts on horror? I'd really actually be curious to see what our audience's take on horror is, because I don't feel like there is a lot of fantasy overlap in the horror department. There is some, but generally, what are your thoughts on horror? Do you like it? Do you not like it? You have to be in the mood for it, or are you like me and just a total scaredy cat?
Yeah, and I mean, this could, depending on the feedback, impact the future of this show. There aren't a ton of horror movies with dragons in them, but there are some that, based on how this episode is received, could move up or down our to cover list.
Yeah.
So would love to know that, as well as any other suggestions for films, TV shows to cover in the future. I think that's going to do it. And we'll see you all next week for Spirited Away.
Good night, y'all.
Hail Satan.
That's all for this week's Dragon Lore. Takes cold and hot, spread shore to shore. Enjoyed yourself? Please join the squad. Follow on social media at BigLizPod. And one quick reminder before you go, to rate, review, and share the show. Thank you for listening. It means a lot. See you next week, same time, same spot.